to give now the floor to Ray Rist, who's going to be speaking about the general history of building evaluator capacities, what evaluators need to know and be able to do now. Ray Rist is one of the creators and co-directors of EvalYouth. He's also former president of IDEAS. He's retired from the World Bank's Independent Evaluation Group and advises national governments on how to design and build result-based monitoring and evaluation systems. So now I'm going to hand over the floor to him.
Well, good morning, perhaps good afternoon for some of you. It's a pleasure to be with you. I want to thank the organizers for the invitation for me to spend time this morning or afternoon with you. And so we have a bit of time here together. And what I really wanted to sort of focus on are some of the key skills that I think become essential in the 21st century with regard to evaluation. You know, I came into evaluation in 1970, 72, and the skill set was much narrower, the expectations were much narrower, and the functions that we carried out were less, but they've become so much more expansive. And I just wanted to spend a bit of time sort of thinking through with you what I see to be the competencies for the 21st century. And so I've classified this into sort of 4 categories of competencies that I think will be important for those of us who carry this profession forward. First area for us to spend a bit of a moment on, our capacity to do institutional analysis. It's interesting to me that we are moving more and more into a systems perspective and more into studies of the capacity of large-scale organizations as opposed to simply a study of a small-scale classroom or a small-scale hospital ward or something like that. And the consequence means we just have to have a new set of skills at this level for institutional analysis. And one of the main skills we need to have is the conceptualization and the understanding of how to build an M&E system. M&E systems strike me now as just probably the rationale for why evaluators are doing what they do. And the building of M&E systems requires an understanding of organizations within which this is going to happen, whether the organization is public, private, as NGO, non-public organization. And the consequence is, with this absence of institutional vision and an institutional awareness, we're left kind of standing at the door. We don't get to go in because we don't understand what's going on inside. And so I think the idea of, for example, in institutional analysis, who and where are the champions? This is one of the first things that has to be sort of sorted out when you're doing evaluation now and you're going to be working on M&E. Where are the champions? And how do you identify the champions? So if you don't have that sensitivity to the life of organizations and the activities of organizations, you're going to be left to the, as I say, at the door. So I think this first competency is a competency for institutional analysis and institutional awareness and the ability to navigate and to work inside institutional levels as opposed, as I said, to a single classroom. That's one. number two of these four competencies that I think are really crucial for us. The second is the ability to systems design and its applications. If you want to design responses and studies at the systems level, it's going to be very important to grasp what's the nature of a system. What is here that's different from subsystems or non-systems? And so the question of looking at a systems analysis becomes really very important. And it's also the ability to link dysfunction of evaluation inside a system to issues like budgeting, accountability, oversight, budgets. All of these things are woven and webbed together, and it's an ability to have this kind of multidimensional perspective that becomes so important. So, and the question then is, how do you collect data inside systems? How do you start the process? Are you going to knock on, in an big office building, door to door to door to collect data? Are you going to try to collect the data? Institutionally and have them, like the institution, help, or are you going to try to do it yourself? So this question of systems design and as well the application of it becomes very crucial. And here, this is absolutely essential to the building of an M&E system, because M&E systems are systems. And so the capacity to build an M&E system becomes one of the core competencies that evaluators now in the 21st century have got to be aware of, capable of, and able to respond when this kind of request is made, which is just happening now more and more all the time. I was just in Tokyo last week, and actually this week, as a matter of fact, yeah. And this was 14 countries that were gathered, and they were all talking about this ability to think through the design issues at this level. You know, in traditional evaluation, there are only three kinds of questions: descriptive, normative, and cause and effect. And most of our training has been, how do you design a descriptive study, a normative study, or a cause and effect study? And of course, the last is the more controversial. But that's as far as it's taken us, and that's as far as we generally have gone. But now the issue of thinking, how do you start to put in a complex organization, how do you put the study design together in such a way that what you have from it is a logical way of intruding into the system to get the data out that you need in order to do the analysis. So big challenge for us. The third type of competency that we need is methodological. This is classic, but it's also saying that now a lot of the questions are a little bit different. Simply a set of surveys or a set of desk audits or a set of mailed questionnaires simply no longer is sufficient for what we're after. We have to start thinking about methodologically, how do we study power, which we get very little guidance on, actually. How do you study power? How do you study alliances? How do you study the willingness of an organization to change? In my jargon, that's called a readiness assessment, not so much a needs assessment. We all know we need data. We all know we need information. But how do we, in fact, are we ready to use it, to frame it, to understand it, to share it in such a way that this is what the institution needs and it's what it's seeking? I find very little conversation about readiness assessments, a lot more obviously about needs assessments. But I think that's kind of misses the point. Do you need it? Of course you need it. I don't think that's so compelling. But the issue of whether you're ready for it strikes me as a much more profound question right now. And so taking our methodological tools to that next level, and it's not necessarily more quantitative or more qualitative, it may be in fact more of both, but it's making sure that we can take the data that we need to have answering the complexity of the questions and the environment we're in, where we're looking for different questions and listening for different questions. That's where that's where the challenge for us really comes. And I would say the final area for us, and this is one of the more interesting, unique, and indeed really wonderful challenges for evaluation, but one where we're not getting a lot of guidance, is how to think through information and knowledge utilization. Notice I didn't say knowledge management. There is some cachet with the concept of knowledge management, but I find that very narrow. I think the issue is much more, how are we as evaluators going to help in the utilization of this information and this knowledge? It's not so much managing it. We don't have to package it so precisely. We don't have to, we don't have to just take the information and categorize it all. The bigger question is, how do you put it together in such a way that that you can find ways to make sure that it's used? This is the big issue for us, is the utilization of it rather than simply packaging it or managing it. And if you become a knowledge manager, that has a whole different connotation than, for example, being a managed leader. You know, back to the book about John Cotter at Harvard some years ago, where he makes a really profound distinction between management and leadership. And different kind of people take on those roles with profound consequences on what happens in the organization. So, for example, don't put a manager in a leadership role and don't put a leadership person in a management role. And the same thing has to do with us as evaluators in terms of the knowledge issue. We have to just think about more than the management of it. I find it just a unproductive way to think about our role. Here we are collecting data, analyzing data, and now we have to think about using data. Not so much that we have to think about managing it. We can do that. But the issue of how to, in fact, utilize this information, I think is increasingly what's in front of us. So, dear colleagues, it's Saturday morning. I mean, I've got my cup of tea here, and this is the first part of the day for me. But we do have categories of competence that we need to do, that we have to think about in terms of making our profession more relevant to the world that we seek the demand from. There are people who want to use evaluation, who need evaluation, who want the kind of information that we can give. But in terms of our capability to do this with more competence, with more confidence, and in a sense with more surety that we're on the right track, we have to expand our competencies. This is no longer a debate of quantitative, qualitative. This is no longer a debate of, an N of 1 versus an N of 200. All of those things are so irrelevant in a way to what we're up against. But we have to think in these days of the 21st century about the kinds of institutions and how powerful some of these institutions are. And when it is that you turn to them or they turn to you, how we're going to be able to respond in a way that's appropriate to the challenges of the 21st century. I wish you well. I wish you a good day. I hope you can glean from all of this deluge of information coming at you a certain amount of insight for your own career. But as Benoit said before, I mean, it's up to you. It's up to all of us to put these careers together and to be timely in the way that we think about these careers, as opposed to simply a lockstep model of take this class, take that class, and presume when you've done your classes, you're a brilliant evaluator. It takes a little more than that. I wish you well. Have a very good day, and thanks again.
Thank you very much, Ray. We have a few questions for you, which I'm going to first read out loud, and then I'm going to send this to you on your private chat box. First, Cecilia De Luca asks if the first component you mentioned includes the readiness assessment. Second, the extent to which evaluations are used is linked to how enabling the environment for evaluation is. In an environment that is not so enabling for evaluation, how can an evaluator enhance and encourage the use of evaluations? I'm going to send these questions to you now on the chat box, and then give you the floor back so you can comment on them. So here.
There we go. Okay. Anyway, thank you for the questions. The first one about where do we find the readiness assessment. I would think, yes, it's something you could do in institutional analysis. You need to know the institution well enough that if you propose a change process, you've got some chance for it to be carried out. I mean, the institutional analysis inevitably has to involve also a theory of change, which is absolutely one of the most vital tools now in our toolkit. You know, our toolkit was so narrow for so long, and the debates that got so hot and so antagonistic over such a small toolkit was rather sad for the discipline. I think it set us back. But the fact that we're now beyond a lot of that, and we're able to have more conceptual understandings of institutions and what role we have with regard to institutions is a gift to us. It's a gift to us. And so I would say yes to our readiness assessments, helping us analyze, is this institution ready for the change process we're talking about? Because I look at most evaluation work as being change management and change engagement. New knowledge brings new possibilities for an organization or an institution. And new knowledge is, of course, new power. And how we manage that role in being able to create new knowledge and create new power is really, it's exceptional for us to try to get this down well. And so let's put readiness assessments in there, and let's put theories of change in there as well. Now, the second question I don't see, so I've forgotten it. I don't know if I'm going to find it or not. ladies and gentlemen, I don't see the second question. So.
Hi, Ray. I'm going to read for you, sorry. The second question says, the extent to which evaluations are used is linked to how enabling the environment for evaluation is. In an environment that is not so enabling, how can an evaluator enhance it and encourage the use of evaluations?
It's really not a very conducive environment. This is where a strategy of sort of thinking of yourself institutional, or finding your way into an institution, finding your way into a change process becomes very important. First of all, you might say, what data are needed? What data can I supply that could be helpful in terms of finding a way to sit at the table? I mean, a lot of this has to do with being able to get yourself to the table. And so one would be the ways that the data could be supplied. The second would be the utilization issue. How might the data be used here? You're sitting in a table and it may be 100 people, 400 people, who knows? And there's obviously some gaps inside. And the question becomes, how do I see those gaps? How do I try to use those gaps? And how can I try to put data on the table that might be relevant? You have to listen so carefully. I mean, this is one of the really important components for an evaluator, is to listen, not just to be quiet, and to listen and try to understand as best you can what's the dynamic going on in that room. Because you're walking in and you don't know the dynamic. And yet this is going to make or break your ability to start to participate in the group. So listen as carefully as you can, and taking your time. It may be most of that meeting you say very little, but when you speak, try to speak with a sense of understanding, and try to speak with a sense of confidence that you see the point where evaluation can help. And then you have to become, in a sense, a marketer of good evaluation and good evaluation strategies, techniques, tools, methods, in order to help bring new information to the table. You understand there are always, though, these situations where folks don't want new knowledge. I've worked in that environment been involved several times, where people have said, Dr. Rist, thank you for coming, but we really don't want that briefing now, which is essentially a signal that knowledge is something they don't want. Particularly politicians often don't want knowledge on their desk because then they're expected to do something with that knowledge. So if they don't have it, they don't have to deal with it. But be patient, listen, and be strategic in your comments. Don't talk too much. Don't become a chatterbox. Just try and make thoughtful contributions to the process. And over a small amount of time, I mean, it may not all happen that first meeting, but then they'll say, hey, can that guy come back or that woman come back to us again? Then you have the possibility of really opening up a conversation. Good luck.